Hi, I'm Colin Smith with Adobe Systems. This demonstration is an introduction to SpeedGrade CS6. It's meant to give you an overview of the user interface, some concepts and ideas. It's not really going to take you too far into the theories of color grading. So it really is an introduction to help you understand what the program is about. And there's a couple of things that are really important to understand. First of all, SpeedGrade CS6 uses a brand new engine called the Lumetri engine. Every single thing you're doing is 32-bit floating point, which simply means you're going to get the best color possible. When you're stretching the highlights or you're crushing the blacks, you're going to have as much latitude as possible, regardless of the file format that you're importing. The other thing that's important to understand is, although the interface does not look like a typical Adobe interface, there are some core concepts that are very Adobe-like when I show you the desktop and when I show you the layer-based grading. Let's jump in and have a look. I'm going to start here in Premiere Pro to show you that when we have a timeline like we have inside here, the easiest way to get your files into Adobe SpeedGrade is to send to SpeedGrade right from the File menu. When I click here and choose that, you can see that it's going to choose to create an XML file. This is a SpeedGrade timeline IRCP file, and then we can export that out. Now we can also import EDLs from other applications. You can import individual files and work on them. There really is no hard and fast rules to get going. So let's jump into SpeedGrade. So let's imagine we've got our files in here, and this is the first thing you see when you open up the application. You'll notice at the top we have this area up here, which is where we work with our files. This is the desktop view. You can call up the desktop view with the D key. Just pressing D will bring up the desktop. There it is, and it's gone. Down on the bottom here are the color controls. If you want to have more room up here in the top, click down here and then press the Tab key, and it will get rid of that. On the left-hand side, there's a tree view of all the drives that I have located and I am connected to. Right now, I'm just looking at one drive that I've got connected to. And inside this folder, the Gymnast folder, I'm looking at a preview of a Macbeth chart and this video file here. Notice that we're looking at our thumbnails, and if I drag this thumbnail slider, drag it up, give it a moment to refresh, I have very, very large thumbnails, and I can drag along the top here to make sure that this is the correct file. If this is the one I want to add to SpeedGrade, I can simply click on this plus button and it will insert it into the timeline. When we're working in SpeedGrade, we're not working in projects. You have a timeline open. And by the way, SpeedGrade is saving that timeline constantly for you, and it will open up the last timeline for you. All of that stuff is saved in your root directory. Okay. I actually have more files in here that I want to look at. I actually have a whole bunch of files here in this Gymnast folder, and when I click on that, it's going to read all of the files inside here. And really what I have inside here are a whole bunch of stills. It's very typical in a grading application to be working with stills. I also have a whole bunch of Array raw files in here. This is Array Alexa files, and you can see they load and they look like they're one individual clip. But there are hundreds and sometimes thousands of clips to work with. Also the same with red files. You can be opening up red files, native R3D files. So if I go inside here, I can look at that, including epic files. And there we go. So you'll notice that I'm noodling around inside a folder, inside a folder, inside a folder. Well, we've got a fantastic way to zoom all the way into these folders. So inside here, if I click on Gymnast, in the top right-hand corner, if I choose not just sequences from the selected folder, but sequences from folder plus subtree, it will look inside and show me each one of the clips inside there. Now I'm looking at all of them. Again, very easy to peek inside of all of these folders and see which ones I want. All right, so the files that I'm going to start adding to my timeline, I'm just going to start clicking on these. and adding them into the timeline and working with them. I could also, down at the bottom, click Add All. So if I had opened this up and wanted to work with all of them, I can do that. I'm just going to click back up in here and press the D key again, and that gets rid of my desktop. Remember, I pressed the Tab key before, and the Tab key, so it toggles that bottom area up and down. Now we're zoomed way in here on a laptop, and look, quite frankly, you're not going to do color grading on a laptop. I'm demonstrating this by really recording this on one screen, but most people are going to be working with two screens. Any second output screen, you've got a DVI, or if you happen to have hardware that supports an SDI display out on Windows, then you can look at that through a calibrated SDI display. Thankfully, over on the right hand side, I can click on this button here and it will zoom to fit. And now when I hit the play key or the space bar, it's going to play my timeline. You'll notice as it's playing, it's selecting each clip. This gives me an indication when I'm down here in the bottom. In just a moment, I'm going to be color correcting and grading this. You'll know which clip you're working on because the playhead will be selecting that for you. And as soon as it goes to the next one, you'll see the next clip will be selected. So I know specifically what I'm working on. Very easy to understand that. Okay, so when we are going out of Premiere Pro, by default right now in CS6, Premiere Pro will create 10-bit DPX files. Make sure you've got a lot of space on your hard drive. DPX files are an industry standard for color grading. They're very big, beautiful 10-bit still images of every single frame. So remember, 24 frames a second, or 2997 times however many minutes times however many hours your movie is. So make sure you've got a lot of room for that. All right, so this is the timeline. We have one timeline inside here, and we have this view of our playhead, and it's going to become very apparent later on how to work with playheads, because we can have multiple playheads. A little tip, if you want to get rid of a clip over here, this little icon right at the head of the clip, you can click and drag this up and get rid of that. So just something to get used to. You're not going to hit the delete key, just click on it. There's also scopes that we can call up inside here. So I can call up a vector scope, I can call up my waveform, and I can call up my histogram. And there's little buttons on here of where to place them. They're completely scalable and accurate. You can also, in these settings, so right now I've shown you the D key for desktop, but if you hit the S key for settings, in here we've got a few settings that are important to look at. Here's the display where you can enable that second dual DVI display. So you happen to have that on Mac or Windows, you can do that very easily. We can change the overall dynamic quality. So depending on the hardware you're using, you can turn down the paused and playing dynamic quality of that. You can also set whether the histogram and the vector scope update when paused, when idle, or on every frame. And rarely do you color grade while something is playing. I mean, you're previewing while that, but by default, you're going to be color grading and looking at the scopes while it's stopped. While it's going is kind of difficult because the image is changing while you're manipulating the controls, so therefore your histogram and vector scope are going to be changing. You can have that. Make sure you got a really fast computer for that. So hit the S key again, we get rid of our settings. So that's not hard. D key, bring it in for our desktop. D to get rid of it. S, bring in our settings. S, get out. Okay? Not that difficult. All right. So we've got our waveforms up. There's our scopes. We also have JKL keys. So there's J going backwards. J again, a little bit faster. K to stop. L, L again, L again, L to play forward. Okay, so some similarities in what you're doing in other NLEs or Premiere Pro. All right, let's go down here and look at this area. We're not going to cover everything. Most of your work will be on these first clips, or the first tabs down here: timeline, clip, look, and mask. I'll also mention that we can work with stereoscopic 3D. Audio in here we can set, pan and scan, which we'll get to in a second. So very simply on the timeline over here, if you look at this area, we've got grading, dissolves, solid clips, pan and scan, and grouping. And what we can do is you can actually drag a grading layer above everything else. And now I can add my grading to a layer. You can think of this as working like an adjustment layer inside either After Effects or new in Premiere Pro CS6, or even if you're from Photoshop. I'm just going to undo that. Okay. So we can also grab a pan and scan, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Most of the time we're going to spend in our look area inside here, and down in the bottom left, this is an Adobe typical user interface that's really powerful. It's layer based. So right now I've got one primary set down at the bottom. I can add another primary just by clicking on it. I can add a secondary. I also have this little flyout menu where I can add things like a lookup table. So if you've got a specific LUT that you want to add for that, I can click on this and then load a LUT that I happen to have, and there's my LUT. Also notice that we have a little eyeball on here, so this is exactly what you would expect in other Adobe applications. So although it's alien at first, there's some concepts that you definitely understand. The desktop, it's very much like Adobe Bridge or the media browser inside Premiere Pro. And here we've got some layer-based grading, which is very much like what we'd expect in Photoshop or After Effects or Premiere Pro. Okay, so we can also save these too. Down at the bottom we have different looks, and you can save these wherever you want on your hard drive. You can create as many as you want, and when you mouse over a look you'll see a little X, and you'll also see a little E when you click on the E. Here you can export this out as a bunch of industry standard looks, and new for CS6, the .look files that you create in SpeedGrade CS6 can be used in After Effects CS6 and in Photoshop CS6. So you can load those, work with those very easily, load them in a number of different formats out there. So looks are very easy to save. There's a button right down there. I click save, and if I scroll down, that's where my look was saved right inside there. So you'll be working with those a lot simply because they're really small and they're easy to change. So if I start clicking on these, here's some looks I had for some other files. They don't necessarily make sense in this particular file, but you get the idea. I can go through these looks very easily and show you what's going on. Okay, let me reset this, and I'm going to go back to a different file that I have in here where we can get some skin tone, and we'll start to work with this. Actually, I like to work with this file, so I'm just going to drag my playhead over in here on this overhead. All right, so let's explore the looks area inside here. We already looked at our layers. Now let's look over here on the right-hand side in our color controls. What I really love about the interface here is it's simple. It gets out of the way. Controls don't start to show up until you mouse over them and then you change them. Right here we have our offset, which you can think of as working with our blacks, our gain, which is working with whites, and the gamma in the middle is controlling light. Each one of these controls has two controls. It has an outside ring, and as I turn that to the left, I'll increase the blacks, drag it to the right, and decrease the blacks, and you'll see my scopes moving in unison. On the right hand side, I'm going to take my gain and turn that up, and I could go over here to the eyeball here and click and turn that on and turn that off, or I could press the 0 key on the numeric keypad, and it shows me the original file and the grade we have on it. Also notice that offset and gain are now full color controls. It's very easy for me to understand what I've done simply by looking at this. Oh, I've offset the offset, and I've changed the gain. We also have the ability of looking at this as sliders and as edit boxes or numeric input. I prefer this. And we've got an inside area inside here too, which is the hue. So the outside, the chroma. The outside is the luminosity or luma, and this is the chroma inside. Now we can either click in here and drag around, but it's much easier to use this as a virtual trackball. And the way you do that is I'm just using a simple scroll wheel mouse, just typical mouse, and I'm right clicking inside here. Now that I've clicked, if I move my mouse, and I'm not holding any buttons, I'm just moving it around, I start to change the color values of the blacks. So if I wanted to warm up the blacks, drag it over towards the warmer colors, cool it off, drag it back in here. While my mouse is still active, if I use the scroll wheel, I can change the overall luma. So two controls at the same time. It's not a true virtual surface, a control surface, but it does give us the same kinds of controls. All right. So the same over here for these controls, right click inside here, and if I wanted to start changing the highlights, I can do that. Okay, so all of these same controls, I should go through these. We've got saturation on both sides, and some systems work with saturation working on the input, some on the output. So SpeedGrade CS6 is compatible with both of these. And again, if you click on these and drag them around, by default they're set at very small increments. If you add the shift key to this, you can change the amount of those increments and move it quicker. Same with the virtual trackballs. The pivot amount, you can think of that as where you're flattening out the colors. So if you drag this around, it's kind of like flattening the colors out and changing the amount of, I guess, contrast. On the right hand side, beside this we have contrast, and we can just start dragging this up, and again I'm hitting my 0 key. That's where we were, that's where we are, that quick, that easy. And you can see that we have these little triangles down at the bottom of our trackballs, and over here in our sliders we have these buttons. So if I wanted to just reset the contrast, I can click on there and I've reset that contrast. Or I can go back there. Remember, I could be saving all of these as looks as I go along too if I wanted. So over here we've got our temperature settings and our magenta setting. And the temperature setting would be, a really quick, easy way to warm things up by just clicking and dragging this over to the right, over to the left. You'll also notice on my waveform on the left-hand side, it's a good tool to use to balance the red against the blue. So you'll see over here, if I wanted the blue to be more balanced, right now it's a little bit lower, watch what happens when I start dragging that to the left. I'm actually balancing out my red, green, and blue. And it's the opposite, but just as effective with the magenta slider. As I click on this, I'm going to balance the green against the red and the blue. So again, clicking over here, and you can see I'm affecting that green. And then our final saturation. So that's just one of the panels in here. We have the exact same amount of controls in shadow, midtone, and highlights. And I know what you're thinking. Well, midtone, shadow, and highlights, well, where are my shadows, midtones, and highlights? That should be your first thought, is that's not a specific known thing. Sometimes my highlights are going to be really, really tight up against the top. Sometimes they're going to span all the way from the middle. Well, that's what this slider here does. Any effect that I'm changing here in the highlights, I can tell it what I want my highlights to be. So you'll notice in highlights, it's mid-tone highlight. So I can jam this up closer to the highlights or closer to the mid-tones. The same with mid-tones. On the right-hand side, there's shadow and mid-tones, highlight and mid-tones, and then shadows. Obviously, there's no reason to have highlights in the shadows, so we've got shadows and mid-tones with all of the exact same controls. You'll be really surprised if you're coming from, a typical Photoshop background with levels and curves and things. You will be amazed at how accurate and how creative you can get with the color tools here inside SpeedGrade CS6. It has revolutionized my thoughts on how I work with color. Okay, let's keep going here. And we talked about looks. We can export those out, save those, reuse those very easily. Let's get into working with masks. So I'm going to just grab another primary, and I'm going to go back to my overall and drag this down very, very dark. I want to create a vignette on the outside. So there's no hard and fast rules. There's no fixed order of operations. I can do this any way I want. So let me go over to my mask, and then you can see that I've got 3 different controls in here for some very simple masks, but also notice down on the bottom, I have full editability for the points and the nodes, and we actually have a planar tracker built in. So we can have complete control to create any shape and keyframe those masks. I'm simply going to click on my vignette mask and then go back over to my look, and I've got 2 controls here for mask. I can apply that to the middle or apply that to the outside. So if we turn that primary off that I've added the mask, you can see that I've added a vignette on the outside. Now obviously I want to tweak that mask a little bit, and this gives me an opportunity to show you the widget. Brilliant idea, amazing German engineering. This is just a brilliant tool, very simple to understand. If I want to increase the vertical size of my mask, click and drag on the vertical arrow. Horizontal, rotation, skew settings, just by clicking and dragging inside these areas inside here. Clicking in the middle area, I can drag the size of my overall, and outside here I can click and drag the vignette area. And it's not just for the full mask. I can click on any one of these points and completely control, move around, add any points. So this is so Adobe-like. You'll definitely get this. And when one of those is selected, I'm just moving that one point, and then click in the middle, and you can drag the whole mask around inside here. And remember, it's fully keyframeable. We go back over to our looks. I can turn this on and off, and I can also set the opacity of that. So instead of going back over to my slider and changing the amount, if that was too much of a vignette, I can just back this off. And that's the same with that LUT. Remember, we added that LUT. I can go in here and add something like a bleach bypass on here and then change the opacity of this. Let me drag this all the way down, and I'm going to hit my period key, which is just the last change that I've made on there. There's my 0 key, which takes us from the original to that point. So stop and think about this for a second. We've got layers and opacity, things that you absolutely know from other Adobe applications. SpeedGrade is well on its way to being a tool that's easy to understand. Okay, let's talk about working with some secondaries. I'm just going to get rid of this timeline just by clicking over here and answering yes. And remember, my D key brings me back up to my desktop, and I want to bring in this particular file in here. So I'll add that D key again, make sure I'm zoomed out. So let's go back to the look, and I'm going to click on the S for a secondary, and we have controls in here for eyedroppers, so you could actually be making a selection in here. I'll show you skin tone in a second, but I want to show you that we've got primaries. So if I wanted the blues in this particular wrestler, I'll click on that blue, and you can see I can control the hue, lightness, and saturation, and if I don't want to be affecting any of those, I can simply turn them on and off. We can also preview this as color gray, color black, or white on black. So you can see we happen to have a specific shot where that primary blue works well. On the right hand side, remember I told you we can hold the shift key down, so I'm holding shift and dragging blur all the way up just to help get a nice clean edge on that and maybe denoise that a little bit. And now I'll go back to none. Over on the right hand side, we can set the offset and gain. So I'm right clicking inside here, and he's blue, and I'm going to just move this over to green. Click and hit the space bar. and we've done a quick secondary on there. And remember, it's on its own layer, so we can turn that on, we can turn that off very easily. All right, let me grab a little bit more of a difficult secondary. Again, we'll hit the D key. I'm just going to scroll down here to this file. This is an ARRI raw Alexa file. Click in here. So this was shot as a log file, logarithmic file, so there is a very milky color to this. And if you're coming from, a 5D, then this might look kind of flat to you. But if you're coming from the film world, this is beautiful to play with because we've got so much latitude in here. The whites are not burned out, the blacks are not crushed. If we want to do that, we have complete control for this. And if you look at our waveform and histogram, tons of information inside here. So I'm going to go over to my look and I'll add a secondary, and I'm just going to go to an area where we get more skin tone in here. Okay, and click on this little plus for the eyedropper and start clicking around in this area here. And as I'm selecting this area, you can see down here my controls are starting to open up. We can go to our color gray area and we could start to tweak this. So if the hue, you wanted it more or less on the skin tone, we can play that ahead a little bit more. We could add some blur to this, just again to soften that out and control just that particular skin tone inside here. Once we have that skin tone selected, if I wanted to warm that up, I'm going to go to my gain and start to warm that up. There it is. And if I hit my 0 key, you can see that I've got the gain. Now I've worked on a swimmer over here. I'm going to click on this look and load that, and this has both a primary and a secondary inside here. So there's my original, my primary. Remember, we can just go over here and you can see I tweaked the offset, I've tweaked the gain, the contrast, and the input saturation, and any of these other ones are not showing up. So I've just tweaked my overall setting inside here. And then the secondary, you can see over here, I've tweaked both the offset and the gain inside here. So it's easy for me just to turn, I'm pressing the period key, which is beside the 0 key on the numeric keypad, just to show you my overall secondary color inside there. All right. So some easy secondaries, some more difficult ones with skin tones, but that is a typical thing that you would do. We're able to add LUTs in here and add our typical bleach bypass that we see so familiar. We've got a lot of control inside here. All right, let's talk about working with multiple playheads. And for that, I want to work with something that's just a little bit easier for my MacBook Pro here. Remember, I'm running on a MacBook Pro, so I don't want this to be stretching the capability too much. So here's my playhead. If I drag the holding the command key control on Windows and let go, I now have two playheads. And both of them are playing by default, but if I click on the little playhead here, I can stop this one and use it as a reference. Multiple playheads, and way over here on the right hand side, if I click on this button, which is in our timeline screen layout, so it's also in the timeline area view, you'll notice that I can have 3 by 3. I can have 9 separate playheads inside here. No other grading application in the world does this. Why is it useful? Comparing. You could compare the beginning of a shot to the middle to the end of the shot. Beginning of the movie to the end of the movie. Beginning of one scene where you wanted to change the color or interpolate that over time to the end of that. It's just a much, much more powerful way to work than just bringing simple reference images in from a library. So multiple playheads, absolutely incredible. Okay, so let me just get rid of that playhead real quick. And I also want to show you that we can turn on different things inside here. Like if I just wanted to show the red channel, the green channel, or the blue channel. If there was an alpha in here or the luminance of that channel, I can turn that on. We can toggle on and off the burn-in, and you can set what that burn-in is. SpeedGrade is really big in working with dailies and exporting those out and burning in any type of time code, SD, HD that you want. We can turn on our overlay area, and again, you can set what that is. We can turn on and off an aspect ratio, and we also have a bunch of crops. So down in the timeline area, this is where we can control what those things are. So if I turn on my crop, I can click and set what that crop is. Again, that's built right in. Turn on my overlays, and I can turn on and off that particular title safe area, the burn-in, all fields, HD rushes, SD rushes, standard, what have you. Really simple to get these going and set up. All right. Let's talk about output. So over here on the right hand side in the top, if I click in output, we can now send this out to any place we want, any of the file formats that we happen to have installed on our system. So any QuickTime formats or image formats. So in the other section here, format and options, other, we've got our native MOV, QuickTime, but this is of extreme importance, the frame sequence. Inside here, notice that we've got a ton of frame sequences, including TIFF at 32 bits per channel. Really, really powerful, high quality, and also OpenXCR export out of here. So really easy, powerful ways to get this stuff out. We could also export out our our file as an EDL if we wanted to. If you hit Command S now or Control S on Windows, it's going to save out the IRCP file, which is the native format for this timeline. One thing I do want to point out is while I was looking at things here in the desktop view, I have a choice of looking at all the files or just the timelines or frame sequences, or just show me my raw files that are inside there. Very easy to understand and weed those out. Which brings me to the last thing that I want to show you. I'll close that timeline. This is a Macbeth chart. This is someone shot a Macbeth chart, which is an industry standard chart. I'm just going to pop this into the timeline, D key, and there we are. We've got an amazing capability inside SpeedGrade CS6 where I go to the clip section, color space, override input format, default color space. If I click on this go button inside here, SpeedGrade will actually recognize this specific chart. And we understand the Macbeth chart and the mini. We're going to understand more and more, and boom, there you go. You can see how fast it understood it. And what's important is it didn't just recognize the black and white points. It recognizes each one of those squares and adjusts the matrix down inside here. That is fantastic. You'll notice over here the whites and the black. Okay, let's say the whites, they've been burned out a little bit. If we go to our highlights and we bring this down, you can see I'm bringing down my highlights, and then I could go to the overall and then just increase the gain a little bit and spread that out. I'll hit the 0 key. That was before. That's after automatic recognition for Macbeth charts. So you can use that for a 2-camera shoot, multiple cameras, and now get everything calibrated that quickly. That is just a very quick overview of the fantastic, amazing power inside SpeedGrade CS6. Don't be intimidated by this new interface. I've already shown you how many things are already Adobe-like inside here. Play around with the controls, grab a simple wheel mouse, and you'll be amazed at how fast you can start working and getting creative in SpeedGrade CS6.